Can you further explain your disapproval of Ayn Rand? I don't really disapprove of Ayn Rand. I liked reading her novels.
So just last night, Jordan Peterson had a Q&A for his Patreon supporters, and the topic came up about Ayn Rand, which I was actually curious to know what Peterson thinks of Ayn Rand, and I haven't yet heard what he does think of Ayn Rand, but last night he talked about her, and fairly positively, although he pronounces her name wrong. It's Ayn Rand, not Ayn Rand. But anyways, he does also say, though, that her characters were unidimensional. And I'm not surprised to hear that, because that tends to be the Wikipedia point of view on Ayn Rand. But I'm going to show also after the clips that Ayn Rand's characters, particularly in the Fountainhead, were not unidimensional and actually quite align with Jordan Peterson's own critiques of the culture today, especially social justice warriors. Okay, so now I'll show Jordan Peterson from last night.
Can you further explain your disapproval of Ayn Rand? I don't really disapprove of Ayn Rand. I liked reading her novels, and I think it's funny because I was given Ayn Rand's novels by a woman named Rachel Notley, who was the mother of, because unfortunately she's deceased, of the current socialist premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley, who was a friend of mine when I was a kid. And it was her mother who was an avowed socialist of the pro-working class classical type, who gave me Ayn Rand, as well as George Orwell and Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Aldous Huxley, a whole raft of really high-quality literary books. And she wanted to expose me to that philosophy. And like, I found Ayn Rand's books, I really liked reading them. They're really romantic. They're interesting adventure stories, I would say. And Ayn Rand had a point. I mean, her family had a hell of a time with the communists in the Soviet Union. Like, she had reasons for doing what she was doing. But the problem with Ayn Rand as a literary figure is that all her heroes are the same people, and they're completely heroic. And all her villains are the same people, the same person, just in different bodies. And they're all almost completely reprehensible. And so, one of the hallmarks of high-quality literature is that the battle between good and evil isn't just fought out between the good guys and the bad guys, like at a cultural level. That would be an identity politics issue, say. And that it's not the good guy as an individual who's like the next messiah. In Ayn Rand, that would be the capitalist messiah. And then the evil, reprehensible, satanic figure. And all of the good traits are embodied in one and all of the bad traits in the other. In really sophisticated literature, I would say that even the villains have good qualities. Like, villains are way more interesting when they're also interestingly good. And, Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment is a good example of that. And all of Dostoevsky's villains, for that matter, because they have deeply admirable qualities. Like Ivan, for example, who's not exactly a villain, but he's certainly atheistic, which put him at odds with Dostoevsky. In The Brothers Karamazov, I mean, Ivan has everything going for him. He's good looking, he's dashing, he's young, he's brave, he's got military training. Like, he's clear headed. He's a hell of a villain. He's a great villain, man. And Ayn Rand, it's just too formulaic in my estimation, and so it starts to verge on the ideological. And she was primarily motivated by making a political point rather than by writing literature, in my estimation. So that's all. I mean, and having said that, I would also say I got great pleasure in reading Ayn Rand's books. So I don't precisely disapprove of her. She just isn't a top-rate philosopher, and she's also not a top-rate literary figure, and those are the reasons. She's a little bit too propagandistic, and her characters are too unidimensional. So, yeah.
And so those are very good comments, and especially for those of us who know about Ayn Rand and her works, I think comments like that are to be praised, because most of the time, it's funny, Ayn Rand seems to be the most talked about person who no one has read. But these are very good comments from Peterson, but I do want to point out the unidimensional thing I think is an oversight. And I'm going to use the Fountainhead for that. And I have a small clip from Rand that will introduce this. She actually breaks down her characters for us in this 20-second clip or so.
The procedure of my thought was that if we take the ideal man as the center, that is really the theme of the story, that's Rourke, then in relation to him, I show three other types in this way. That Rourke is the man who could be the ideal man and was. Wynand is the man who wasn't but could have been. Keating was the man who wasn't and didn't know it. Toohey is the man who was not the ideal man and knew it. That was the definition for myself as to why I take these four as the key figures.
And here's an excellent breakdown then of the main characters in the Fountainhead, and don't these sound like archetypes? And there are so many parallels with her analysis with these four characters of the modern culture in the same analysis that Peterson gives. So for example, consider Ellsworth Toohey, who Ayn Rand says is someone who could not be a hero and knew it. There are a great many parallels between that kind of character and modern social justice warriors. Recall the video I made on my other channel where Peterson is on Joe Rogan and he talks about beta males. He talks about people. They can't compete in the alpha male capitalistic modern society. And so they destroy it, or they seek to destroy it. That's the same thing as Ayn Rand's Ellsworth Toohey, who's the nemesis in the Fountainhead. It's the same thing. And yet, apparently, Rand's characters are unidimensional. Or you can consider the other examples. So consider Gail Wynand as someone who could have been a hero, but didn't. What are the parallels for that in modern society? Maybe these people, for some odd reason, maybe they get brainwashed in college. Maybe they could have been great people, but they get indoctrinated into socialism or leftism or something like that and hate the rest of their life. And maybe Peterson is reaching out to a lot of these people and changing their minds, finding the Gail Wynards in the world and getting them back on track, back to a better life and to a productive life. And then there's Peter Keating, who is a person that couldn't be a hero but thought he could be. And these are the people that scramble and do their best out of a bad situation. Essentially are pathetic people, but you have to at least give them credit for trying, in a sense. They're not going to be like Ellsworth Toohey. They're not going to be evil because they think there's a hope for them. And they're going to try to do what they can, even though they will scramble and not do very well. But the difference is that Ellsworth Toohey knows that he'll never be a hero, and so he seeks to destroy the world. And consider a character not mentioned in Rand's clip, Dominique Franken. She's a very interesting character because she actually fights the hero, but it's because she doesn't believe the world deserves heroes. She has great contempt for the world and doesn't believe that the world deserves any great people, that she kind of wants things to be destroyed as well. So she fights against the hero, and actually she's the romantic partner of the hero too for most of the book. So that's another interesting part of it as well, because I think a lot of us too probably have contempt for the world, and some of us might shrug because we don't believe that, like, why should we give an effort? Why should we pay more and more taxes to a government that's corrupt or that's spending money in the wrong places or whatever? And thus, there's Ayn Rand's next novel, Atlas Shrugged, who she's known for probably most in The Fountainhead, even though The Fountainhead's my favorite. And this is where productive people slander it and say that she's talking about the rich. No, it's not. She's talking about any productive member of society goes on strike because they're sick of being a slave to everyone else around them, essentially to the social justice warriors who essentially take over. That's Atlas Shrugged. Ellsworth Toohey types and Peter Keatings, who don't know any better, they take over. And the Howard Rourkes and essentially the Gail Wynards, although they also don't quite know what's going on, they go on strike because they're sick of it and they're not going to do it anymore. And I guess, are there parallels with that in modern society? Yeah, what about the MGTOWs or the Tea Party? There's all kinds of parallels that can be made here. There are not to be dismissed by calling it unidimensional. Again, I think Peterson is being uncharitable when he condemns Ayn Rand for being unidimensional in her characters, and yet Peterson's, at least one of his main thrusts, is these archetypes.